There are lots of different ways to make knives, from the really simple to the elaborate. But ultimately, the goal here at Carter Cutlery is to make a knife with superior metallurgy. We always start with the finest steel that money can buy, and we're going to forge it and work it in such a way that the end result is a blade with super fine grain structure. That is going to result in a knife that's really easy to sharpen, yet it'll take a really keen edge and hold that edge for a really long time. Today's style of knife making is going to be the traditional Japanese rural style called Kuro-Uchi. That literally means black hammered. We're going to split a piece of mild steel almost down to the back, and in that void we're going to insert a core of carbon steel. We're going to then forge weld it together, making it one piece of steel. That billet will then be hammered into shape, and the rest of the procedures will be done to finish that knife. Once that knife is completed, we'll use that knife to cut a few things, and you'll see just the great results we get with even such a simple, rural, expedient style of knife making. Okay, well, enjoy the process. Okay, let's get started. We're going to start by putting the carbon steel bar into the fire so that we can forge a little core. There's our little carbon steel core, forged, cut off, and I've fluxed it with a combination of borax, boric acid, and iron filings. That's going to aid in the forge weld procedure. So there's the void into which we're going to put our steel core. Now we've put the mild steel with the carbon steel core back in the fire for the most important and most critical process in the whole knife making, and that's called forge welding. The goal is to heat the steel up to a temperature where the metals will fuse together, but without overheating them. Okay. We have forge welded the two different steels into one billet. And then I forged the tang. This is the part that's going to go inside the wooden handle. I put a little curve in the tang, so for the remainder of the forging operations, I can get a firm grip on it with my tongs. You see I have a nice 3-point contact. That tang will be later straightened before I put it back into the handle. Next, we're going to forge the heel part of the blade out. Okay, now the goal would be to trace out a proven pattern on the billet that I forged out and cut it out. Now we'll heat it up a little bit so that we can cut it out with the metal shears. Now you can see it's very much looking like our pattern. Next is to clean up the tang blade junction, and then we'll reforge those to the final shape. Traditionally, in this style of construction for knives, the tang has been the weak point. If the tang is forged thin and also narrow in cross-section, excessive moisture within the handle can lead to excessive rusting. And some of the lesser quality Japanese Kuro-Uchi knives have been known to rust themselves right through the tang where the blade would break off from the handle. To avoid this, I always forge the tangs of my Kuro-Uchi knives extra thick. Not only does it put a little bit more heft inside the handle for finer balance, but it makes almost an impossible barrier for rust to eat its way through. This blade will be sharpened and used to the point where over 30, 40 years the blade will be sharpened away to nothing through constant use before that tang will rust through. Another thing that we do at this stage is we carefully examine the thickness. Now's the time to go back and make any minor corrections while we're still doing the hot forging procedure. So in the spirit of my teacher in Japan, who always told me to get it thinner, at this stage I'll make the blade a nice dull cherry red color and forge it once again just to get a super thin blade. Okay, the next step is the first step in the heat treating process. This is annealing. I'm going to heat this blade again to a dull cherry red color, aiming for about 750 degrees Celsius. And we're going to put it in this bucket of rice straw ashes. And we're going to let it cool until the temperature drops at least below 250 degrees Celsius. This will relieve any stresses that are in the steel from the forging process. So that doesn't look like much now, but if we flick out the lights, you'll see it's the perfect annealing temperature. Okay, now that the blades have been annealed in the bucket of rice straw ashes and then sandblasted to remove the black scale, the next step is cold forging. The cold forging leaves the surface of the blades really nice and smooth and of even thickness, and internally it has even further refined the size and structure of the grain. We're going to straighten out the tangs now. The next step is to stamp the maker's mark. My Carter stamp, my Mitsubishi or my 3-star mark, and the Honkei, the House of Origin mark. Okay, the next step is straightening and making sure the blades are not twisted, and we'll grind them to the exact shape, dimensions that we want, and then we'll prepare them for heat treating. Okay. Next, we take the straightened blade and coat it in clay. This is going to enable the blade to quench properly. Dry it off and see if it flaked off anywhere. It didn't, so that one is ready to go. So you see we have 2 bars of steel heating here, and that is going to heat our water so that we can quench those 2 blades in water that's at the right temperature. Okay, now we're ready to heat treat. Okay, we'll need to do this in the darkness so that we can gauge the temperatures correctly. Now that we annealed it in the rice straw ashes and just quenched it in the water, the third and last process of heat treating is tempering. We're going to be doing this by the traditional Japanese method by sprinkling droplets of water on the heated blade and watching how it dances off, and that'll tell us the correct temperature. Okay, our blades now, metallurgically, are complete. They've been forged, annealed in the rice straw ashes, quenched in the water, and now tempered by fire. The next step is the same with all knives. After the heat treat process, the blade needs to be ground. We need to put a secondary edge, which will thin the blade down from its original thickness, and then we'll be putting the primary edge, which is the edge that'll be actually doing the cutting. Okay, now that we've ground a secondary edge on and we've come all the way down to the primary edge, I'll do the next grinding step by hand on my water stones. Next, we're going to clean off that dirt that we put on the blade before we heat treated it. Got a wet rag here that I dipped in the same kind of mud, which will act as a mild abrasive, just enough to clean that extra dirt off. Be real careful here I don't cut myself. Now we're ready to polish it and put the handle on. Next, we'll buff the secondary edge on the flap sander. Lastly, in the polishing process, we use this green buffer. Now we're ready to attach the handle. Okay, lastly, I'll take a little piece of 240 grit sandpaper, clean the handle up a little bit. It's a wooden handle. It's an inexpensive handle, actually made of poplar wood, but it sure looks nice when it's cleaned up a little bit. Now, for longevity, for durability, I'll coat that handle in a little bit of tung oil. The tung oil will penetrate into the wood and seal it. And it's a natural oil, so no problem using it on the handle of this knife. So after we've wiped off the excess tung oil from the wooden handle, we'll give the blade a quick squirt of Japanese blade oil, and we'll clean it all off. And except for the final hand sharpening, all that remains with this knife is to put it to good use. So there you have it, from start to finish on a good day, under an hour. Very simple, very rustic, and extremely effective. Now, if this style of knife making interests you, you can find a whole lot more details about it. All the different tools I use, the history of my knife making in 18 years in Japan. It's all in this new book called Bladesmithing with Murray Carter, published by Krause Publications. It's really a very nice book with lots of beautiful color photographs of the equipment, and a nice collection of the knives that I've made in the past. There's a really nice art dagger that I made, and all the instructions for any kind of aspiring bladesmith, and enough information for just a curious person to understand completely the Japanese knife making process. So there you have it. Bladesmithing with Murray Carter.